Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it's important to remember that sometimes in life it's the simple act of speaking up is the most important thing that we can do. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean we are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to assume that you do because you're listening. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel, so if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to follow us on social media. You can find us on the Facebook, the Twitter, and the Instagram at where else? We're at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I say this a lot, but it is the most important, it really is, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, guess what? We love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we've got a real interesting one. It's called Benediction from writer-director Terence Davies, who has done a myriad of things. I won't bore you with his list of credits, but they are impressive and they are long. And it is the story of legendary 20th century war poet Siegfried Sassoon and his lifelong quest for personal salvation through his experiences with family war, his writing, and destructive relationships. And, you know, this all goes unresolved, never quite realizing that you've got to figure this stuff out internally and from yourselves. You know, the answers come from within, not necessarily from without. And I mean, Sassoon was I didn't know a lot about him. I mean, but this is a fascinating guy who was not afraid to speak up, to speak his mind, to speak his truth. He was one of those people who you can't help but admire, but also feel bad for, because he was a tortured soul, and for a wide variety of reasons, which you see in the film. But he is played by the one and only Jack Lowden, who did a fantastic job in the role. And we talked about him reading for the part, working with Terence Davies, because this is obviously a very personal film for Terence Davies as well. But just the process therein and the experience and really getting to the root of a character like this, because he gives such a compelling performance, and he's one of those actors that we're going to be seeing a lot more of in the future. He's the kind of actor who draws you into the role and really makes you feel it, and he does a fantastic job with it. Both him and Terence on this film. It's definitely one worth checking out. It is playing now at the TIFF Bell Lightbox here in Toronto, and it is rolling out over the next few weeks over various cities all across Canada. But first, please enjoy our talk with Jack, because between you and me, it's a darn good one. I mean, obviously, first off, just thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate you coming on to doing this.
No worries.
Now, congrats on the movie. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I guess my first question for you is, walk me through getting that call about, reading for Terence, and I mean, just sort of playing this man who, I didn't know who he was, but I mean, this guy had layers to him. And I mean, walk me through, I guess, sort of that initial conversation.
It started with the script. I was sent the script and I read it and loved it. It's a tremendous script. It's a remarkable piece of screenwriting. I knew vaguely who Sassoon was from school. And I put myself on tape, sent it to Terence, and then met Terence, and then got the part. So it was kind of nothing sort of out of the ordinary. It was quite run of the mill, the way of getting it, but it was still quite a remarkable thing. I knew that the part was special. I knew the part was special. Yeah.
Now, I mean, I love that you mentioned the script, just because your character has such a very exacting use of language. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, for you, was that something that was in the words, or was that something that you kind of brought in? Because I mean, I was so struck just on how sort of very deliberately and very carefully he spoke.
That's it's all in the script. This is a project that is all from the script. It's there was sort of nothing was sort of up for interpretation in a way. It was so exact the way that he'd worked it out, Terence. Probably to do as well with the fact of the period when it was set as well. And these sort of circles that he moved in, everybody's sort of incredibly smart-mouthed, quick-witted, and whatever. So no, it was all incredibly deliberate and already on the page before we even turned up. Yeah.
Now, I mean, for you, especially playing someone who, a real person, like, is there extra pressure on your end? Like, how much research do you go in, or do you try to just go based off the script?
Try and go off the script as much as I can, because I've played a few real people, and I think if you allow yourself to get too overcome with sort of research, particularly when it's people that have been in the public eye or have done, or there are sort of expectations of you play when you play them, it can sort of work against you. So I try and work from the script as much as possible. But that said, to have the opportunity to research someone like Sassoon and delve into him, it just as a sort of, you know, member of the public is an amazing thing, because I really didn't know that much about him. And when I learned what he did and what he did for us, essentially, it was quite remarkable.
Well, I mean, there's such, like you say, I mean, the dialogue at the time and the circles, it has such a cutting edge and a cutting wit, but at the same time, you've got to wear this angst and this pain. I'm kind of curious, how did you manage to find that? I mean, especially given that you're playing one side of the coin here. Like, did you get to have any sort of conversations with Peter as well to figure out how to play him overall?
No, I did. The funny thing about this is that I didn't meet Peter until I'd shot most of my stuff. I think probably that was to do with the fact that we shot during COVID, and also just the nature of the shoot. So I didn't meet him. It was like week 5 of the shoot. Then I'd shot everything, and we sort of did a quick comparison about, because he's Scottish as well, about our accents, what accents we were doing. Yeah, it was on a makeup truck, but it was sort of too late because I'd shot everything. But yeah, no, to have him play the older version of me is quite wonderful.
How was it to work with Terence? Because, I mean, obviously he has this sort of amazing track record and sort of pedigree. Like, I'm curious because, I mean, for you, you started off in the stage and you've gotten to work on some fantastic projects with some great people, but I can imagine Terence is sort of a different beast, as it were, when it comes to working with somebody like of that grade.
He is a different beast. He is, I think it's always, I've never worked with anyone as exact as him in terms of what he wanted. You know, I've worked with a few writer-directors, but a lot more is up for interpretation, where with Terence, it's very specific, and he's felt every beat before you turn up. So it was quite a unique experience, matched with the fact that, you know, it was evident fairly quickly that it was about Terence as well as Sassoon. So it was an unbelievably personal story for him. So, you know, I didn't want to get in the way too much.
Well, and I mean, I love the narration work in the film as well. And I mean, I was curious, was that something you recorded beforehand, or was that something you got to record after the fact?
We recorded it the day before we started shooting. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
All of it in one sitting, which was quite a daunting, terrifying thing, having not lived through any of it. But it had to be that way. And I think that was to do with the fact that because it was going to play such a big part in the film, Terence, in terms of timing out his shots, timing out his scenes, because he's very keen always to use the entire poem of whatever poet he's working on. So it was very important for him, but quite scary for me. I wish I could have done them again, but that's the same story with everything.
Now, I mean, in following your career, something I love is just that obviously you came from the theater and you have sort of the theater background and the theater training. And I mean, I've always found that people who come from theater definitely seem to be more prepared for the ups and downs or the ins and outs of working on television or working on films. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what is it about sort of the classical theater training, or theater training as it were, that prepares you maybe a little bit more than, say, other actors for life on set?
Well, it's an interesting question, because it almost doesn't prepare you. You know, I did stage my whole childhood, and then when I first went pro, so to speak. I did that for about 4 or 5 years professionally down in London, and in New York and things like that. So I had an immense amount of experience on stage, but it didn't really prepare you for screen, because they're sort of quite different. They're very, very different professions as far as I'm concerned. So it sort of doesn't really prepare you, because the nature of shooting on camera is so broken up, so sort of disturbed, constantly disturbed, whereas on stage, once the gun goes off, it's in your hands until the curtain comes down. So but what it does give is the preparation is sort of built into you, because you're far more self-reliant on stage, because you have to be, because there's not all these wonderful technicians and people, not as many actually. So you're a lot more independently minded and not as reliant on other people. I think that's what it gives you.
Well, I mean, I got to imagine it allows for a certain degree of confidence as well, because I mean, obviously, with something like Slow Horses, which I mean, I love the show, and I mean, hell, you've gotten to share camera time with The Rock, which is a different experience. I got to imagine a different experience entirely for you. Like, how do you? Is it every time you go into something, is it a job, or do you allow yourself that moment of like, oh my God, The Rock's over there. Holy shit, I'm sharing a scene with Gary Oldman. How do you sort of balance those on a day-to-day basis?
That takes a long time. And if it's a job, it only really happens if it's a job as long as something like Slow Horses, where you do it. So you do, I mean, it was about a year we shot that for. And
right.
So you can get over the initial sort of starstruck thing, and you feel more comfortable on set, and you feel like you know what the character's doing. Whereas most films, you know, it's like 8-9 weeks or a couple of months, and so there's just no time to really take all of that in, which is a shame, because you would think you would just spend your whole time. That would be the thing I would change if I could go back and change anything. The things I've gotten to do and the people I've gotten to work with, I do wish sometimes I just spent the whole job just gawking at them. I found time to do that on Slow Horses. It was a scene between Gary and Kristen Scott Thomas, and I wasn't needed for hours, but I turned up hours early to literally just hide on set and watch the two of them work, and that's my favorite bit about that job.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Now, I mean, I gotta ask, thinking back to the younger days, like, was there a piece of work or like a film or a play or even a TV show that sort of had the light bulb go off for young Jack and so make you want to get into this business?
I grew up religiously watching BBC 1970s, 1980s comedies.
Okay.
So I watched sort of comic geniuses like Ronnie Barker and David Jason, John Le Mesurier, all these guys, all these very sort of, you would call them twee now, I guess, quite
right.
twee comedies. But life just looked wonderful in them, no matter if one of them set in prison. Life looked really sort of, all, you know, birds tweeting everywhere. But the rhythm and the timing of these guys was just fantastic, and I got obsessed with it. And I basically got into acting because I wanted to make people laugh. And I think that's still what I'm doing. Maybe not in Benediction as much, because it's, you know, or some of the things I've done, but it's definitely the reason I got into acting. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, part of me wants to see you sort of sitting on the shores of Torquay and, you know, managing a little hotel in a reboot or something like that.
Anything like that. It's all I want to do is comedy. So sort of it's sort of all I've not done other than 1 or 2 projects. But whatever I do, I'm trying to make it funny. You know, I just always try and think of the funny in every situation. So yeah, and that's to blame what I watched when I was younger.
Well, I mean, I guess that kind of dovetails into my next question, because I mean, on something like this film, obviously everything that's happening is very serious, and I mean, even very cutting. Even when it's funny, it's not supposed to be funny, it's meant to be cutting. How do you sort of keep the levity on a shoot like that?
You've just got to, I take the work seriously, but I don't take myself seriously, and I never feel that I'm in it, so to speak, because I feel like you can be in the moment, I guess, but I don't feel like I am walking about in the early 1900s, having been in the trenches and written some phenomenal poetry, because I haven't. The only thing I can do is think of what have I done that he did? What have I felt that he felt? So it never does get too personal. It only ever gets, I want to get it right. I want to do it justice. That's as intense as it gets. I don't, if I have to do a scene where I'm bawling my eyes out at the end, or I once did a play where I died of a syphilitic stroke every night.
Oh my God.
If I started to think that I was dying of a syphilitic stroke, or if I really allowed that to affect myself,
yeah.
Again, that's where the stage training comes in. You can't, because you've got to do it again the next night. So I've never been affected by things like that. I've been affected watching other people watching things, but not by myself. I'd go crazy. Yeah.
Now, I mean, just to start putting a bow on this, I mean, at the end of the day, now that the film is getting seen by more and more audiences, what do you hope that we pull away from, like, who this guy was? Because, I mean, like we said at the beginning, I didn't know who he was until I did some research and I saw some of his writings. I was like, wow, this guy was prolific. He was immensely fascinating, but I really didn't have an understanding of who he was and what he did. Like, for you playing the man, what do you hope audiences pull away from this film?
I think his anti-war stance, conscientious objector, I think, with what's happening in the world at the moment, and what's always, war is always happening somewhere, and in the world of sort of social media and such, like when we retweet things, we're protesting the war, we retweet things, or we march in London against the Iraq war years ago or whatever. I think for our generation and others to be reminded that there were the first generations to do this, those existed, and he did it in a time, in Britain at least, where he could essentially be shot for it.
Mm-hmm.
And ostracized, whereas being anti-war now on the streets, online, maybe you might get some abuse, but it's nothing compared to what he would have gotten. So his enormous risk in doing what he did, he was a real trailblazer for the anti-war movement in this country, at least. And to have done that during the First World War, where sort of king and country was at its most fervent, is just remarkable. So it's just, I would want audiences to be reminded that they're not the first, and they're doing it in a safer UK than back then.
For sure. And I mean, the man had a sense of being a soldier as well. And it was just, he was an interesting guy, and it was a really fantastic performance. And congrats on the film. And thank you so much for the time today, Jack.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.